All right, we can jump in because we have a lot to cover. So I want to thank everyone for joining us and Karin for being our amazing presenter. Karin Kirk is a science journalist and works with Yale Climate Connections, among many other things, and has been actively involved in CLEAN for many, many years. CLEAN is the Climate Literacy and Energy Awareness Network. If you haven't joined us before, welcome. We are there's Florida in the chat. We're a climate and energy education organization, and some housekeeping things. I'll be monitoring the chat and the Q&A as we go along. We do have some time for questions at the end, so feel free to either pop them in the chat or I can allow you the ability to speak technology-wise. You'll be able to take yourself off mute if you want at the end, and we'll talk things out. So brainstorm questions as Karin is going, and yeah, let me know if there's any issues. I'll be monitoring the chat. Without further ado, let's go ahead, Karin.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Gina. And thanks everyone for being here. So just to tag on that, if you have a specific question, you want to like go through a scenario or whatever, stay on. If, we'll kind of go for a half hour or slightly less with the basic stuff. And then if you want to chat about stuff, then stay on and we'll chat and sort of let people go or whatever. And I'm going to turn off my video to save some bandwidth. This topic is as big as you could possibly make it, right? Like, why doesn't everyone agree about climate change? So I'm taking one slice through this. Some of this, I'm sure, will be stuff that you know. Hopefully some of it is new, and hopefully you get some ideas for how to proceed. Because this is a perpetual challenge of the nation, and it's not just climate change, right? It's lots of things. Also, when we did our little demo, the slides were a little bit laggy. So I hope that's not the case, but Gina will tell me if that's the case. Anyway, so we got to just know who our audience is. I have some interesting data that hopefully you haven't seen all before, but some interesting stuff on how to know who your audience is. Based on who your audience is, you know what you may have in common with them or what they may have in common with climate topics or climate solutions. Where's pushback coming from? Understanding their end, understanding your end of potential conflict. And then where is that common ground? It's always there. It's hard to find, especially when we're not in the mood. And establishing that constructive tone in your classroom or in your teaching. And framing everything around their values rather than your values. And also along the way, sharing all the clean stuff as I go. And Gina will post the links, and I also made a PDF that just has all the links, so you don't have to worry about that. A lot of the public opinion data I'm going to use comes from the Yale program on climate change communication, in part because I work with them, in part because it's just very handy and good graphics. They're not the only ones doing it, and there's lots of other data too. But climate change, this is a wedge issue. And so the question I use to really separate what we're thinking, when or where, is, are humans causing climate change? There's many questions you could ask, but that's a good dividing line. The bluer this map, the less agreement there is. The warmer the colors, the hotter the colors, the more agreement there is that yes, global warming is caused by humans. Right away, this is super interesting, broken down to the county level. Right away, your brain is thinking, why are those relationships there? I look at Wyoming and I think, of course, it's a fossil fuel state. I look at Texas, I think the same thing. I look at California and I think about their politics. So you can already start to think about where those attitudes come from. And that's the mindset that we need all the way through this topic. Those climate opinion maps are part of the CLEAN collection. It's a permanent link and then it updates every year. And so even though this piece of text says the most recent is 2019, the link will take you to the 2021. So it always updates. And this study has been going on, I think, since 2008. And it's a really good moving record of how Americans feel about climate change. Because one thing that's really interesting is you look at the right-hand end of this and you look at that 9% dismissive, and almost everybody says, oh, is that all? It feels like more. And so this little scale is really useful for you to check your own sense of who's where, because that 9% is small, but it's prominent. And so, but we don't want to give it any more weight maybe than that 9% that it actually is. And look at the other end. It's huge, big, solid majority. And so we don't need to like freak out too much about the right-hand end of the scale, but we need to know that it's there. But I would say, you know, look at the bigger, much bigger half, and know that really a lot of people are up to speed on this. And if you look at how the data has changed over the years, this is a 5-year trend. It's actually really interesting. If you look at the bottom, at the dismissive, doubtful, and disengaged, the lines are kind of flattish. You know, those audiences have not changed that much. Meaning, if you're going to take someone who's really dug in their heels about climate change and change their mind, you can see that that's hard. That body isn't changing much. But if you look at the other ones, the cautious and concerned, you can see that those actually have shrunk as the alarmed has grown. So the task of taking someone who's just uncertain or is clear on it, but not like worried, it's much easier to bump them up a category. And so let's not just think of this as changing the mind as the dug in person, but you know, motivating everybody up towards the alarmed end of the scale. And not that we want to alarm people for the sake of that, right? But it is alarming. This graph shows kind of the same thing. So this question is, you know, is global warming happening? You know, is climate changing? And the line is, you know, is pretty well going up. A total of 72% say like just a yes of any kind of affirmative, and 57 are pretty darn sure. And so, but at least I like the slope of that line. And here again are your resistors. That line's not changing, which is really interesting. Now the human attribution question. What bums me out as someone who works in climate is the jaggedness of this line. We make progress and we lose it, and we make progress and we lose it, and where people are losing their attention or they're swayed by other things. The slope is up-ish, right? I mean, it goes up, but it's slow. And so that's the hard part for us. So that's sort of where we are. So that dismissive camp is maybe not very big, but still not everybody is really with us on that. If you want to boil it down to one indicator, it's their political worldview. And I hate to make things political, but we need to understand the causes and we need to understand where we are when we talk to people. And this is a huge reason. Is it a deal breaker? Absolutely not. But it's the key. It's just an entry point for you to start to think about what's the dynamic and what's that person's values and how do I respond? This is like the world's most obvious map. If you divide out what people think about are humans causing climate, if you divide that out by political party, Democrats, again, warm colors are yes, and cool colors are no. So Democrats are like, yes, humans are causing changes in the climate. Wyoming in particular, Republicans, no. We knew that. Okay, just more ways to look at it. Okay, so here you are. You're a professional, you're an educator, you're a teacher, you're a concerned person. And what do you do when you get someone who's in the, you know, who's just not agreeing, whether they think it's fake, whether they think it's, you know, misleading or unimportant, you know, what am I supposed to do? And I feel you, it's not a great place to be as the problem grows in its urgency and you feel powerless. So I start off by saying like, I hear you, it's tough. But there's actually a lot of good news because there's a lot that you can do. The areas of common ground are huge. And what it takes for us is to back off some of our angst on that and look for that common ground. There is a lot of it there. And from the educational point of view, climate is such a big topic. And gosh darn it, we're good at connecting dots. And there are so many ways to teach this and bring this into the lives of our students that you will find ways that are going to connect it. And will everything work? And will the first try work? Maybe, maybe not. But there are so many ways. So you've got a lot of tools, a lot of angles. So we can start off by thinking like, why do people care about climate change? And this is my list. Anyone could make their list. I think this will be actually a cool way to start off with students. But the reasons we care are going to be very personal. No skiing on my list. That actually might be higher on my list if I were perfectly honest. But the reasons are different for everyone. But it spans so many things, and so that here's where you can start to nurture that common ground. People are going to have reasons for caring that have a lot of overlap, or even if they don't have overlap, they're reasons that little entry points that you can use to broach the topic. Because you see this, if you look at social media, what you see, what the reason people fight is that someone uses their priorities and they impose them on somebody else. Does that work? Nope, never. So what actually works is what's their deal. And now I'm going to meet them where they are. The only way to do this is to kind of relax your own priorities and your own values and really move into their space, meet them where they are. Then you can actually start to be strategic and learn a lot about what's making them feel a certain way. And you can get quite like light on your feet. You know, you can go in any direction with your argument. And then it's actually gets to be really interesting because also you're learning a lot along the way. So how do I know? How do I know what someone's priorities are? If it's an individual, you ask and you ask and you ask and you ask and you ask a lot of questions until you start to form a picture and maybe they get more comfortable in talking to you. If you're looking at a community, Yale has made these really cool fact sheets that you can pull down these menus. I use Montana where I live, but you can go by counties and districts and then you check the boxes you're interested in and it'll just give you a quick thumbnail of what people are thinking. And hopefully when you do this, you'll be surprised about areas where you do that. So if this is the fact sheet output for Montana, and you can make these into little PDFs if you want to give them to people, bring them to meetings. If you meet with politicians or curriculum designers or community leaders, you can say, here's where our common ground already is. And you can see the red areas of agreement are great places to begin the conversation. And the blue areas or the pale yellow are the ones that are on a little bit shakier ground. So I highly recommend doing this for your own community. And so you can start to see where some place where you can proceed with confidence and where some places are like, I might not take that angle. I particularly like in this tool, who should do more. And again, this is just sorted for Montana. But because climate science, a lot of the resistance comes from the need for climate action. But people will have different opinions on where the action needs to come from. And that shows you where your angles can be. So here we're like, let's the corporations take care of it. Citizens somewhat too. Be careful here because we don't want to get into this is all of our problem when it's actually a systemic problem that comes way over our heads. But you can see who maybe you might not want to, criticize your governor or something like that. So again, these are different for everywhere, but it's a cool place to start and you can see your avenues for possibilities. So around here, I would talk about corporations and I do a lot. So why do people not care? What's the pushback? And so right now we hear a lot about gas prices. We often hear about sort of our own energy security, like why would we give up, our resources when someone else can just use them? Or economic arguments, China should do all the work while we don't. So much of this is culture wars, so much of everything has become culture wars, but that's not an unsolvable problem for us. And then just the regular cognitive things that our brains don't like, depressing information and complex information. So a good starting point is to ask yourself, are these legitimate reasons for someone not to care? And that totally the answer is yes. And again, this is part of this, like we have we've studied this, we're formally trained, right? And we are ready to go. But I think backing off and saying all of these reasons are legitimate, just about any reason, honestly, is legitimate because you got to meet people where they are. So listening hard when people talk about their reluctance, that's a huge opportunity of learning for us. So especially at the outset, it's more listening than talking because you don't know how you're going to frame it, right? Until you really hear what's going on. And, we're trained in this, we love this, and it's very tempting. This is a little cannonballs made out of carbon dioxide molecules, of course. And we could say, yes, but you're wrong, but isotopes, but ice cores, but right? And that's sort of how we roll. I think that's a terrible idea for the most part because Eve started now a battle. And so before responding, before throwing out the science cannonballs, it's more of what makes you think that? And what do you think, how could we find the answer? Things like that. So this is sort of a mode we're well trained in, and it's maybe something we should think about dialing back. So instead of the science cannonball, the first step in any kind of dissenting situation is figuring out where people are and offering them some empathy. And that'll immediately de-escalate. A simple statement, I hear you. I mean, have we not all used this in our own families? It goes a long way because it just breaks the tension. Instead of pushing back, you're just relaxing that. I hear you. That's a fair point. Oh, that's interesting. I like the way you phrased that. I'm not necessarily agreeing, but I'm giving them credit for the point that they're bringing to the table. These situations are not easy for them either. If your pulse is going up, so is theirs. So these de-escalation moves are good for everybody. So de-escalating. So you start with that bit of empathy. And then if people are feeling relaxed, you start to figure out where are they? Asking, uncovering, and I teach entirely separate workshops on this exact process. But so you're asking questions, they're loosening up, they're kind of enjoying the interaction. Then you can identify those areas of shared agreement. Oh, I see we're both really interested in Montana being an energy state. Cool. And now that we have some overlap, now we can look at what's the real angle I'm going to bring to the situation. And this is whether it's a student or someone in the grocery store or a family member, anybody. I teach, like I said, whole workshops on that. Coming up, the next one is this summer with the Climate Generation Group. And it's a 2-day conference. But within that, I have a workshop on this where you get to role play and you get a little like bingo card as to do people hit these checkpoints and stuff like that. So if just that interests you, then you've got another resource. But today we're really more about the classroom. So that list of the 5 is not enough. We need to take some additional steps. So the ones in green now are the ones that are really more specific to the classroom. That a classroom is a safe space, that everyone should feel supported and heard, that it's a space that people can bring those concerns. Skipping down to the bottom of the list, that we make the learning something we construct together rather than we like lecture from on high. And obviously solutions, lots to do with solutions, not just that they're beneficial, but also they're being used by people like you. And that together we can bring, we can leverage these solutions to make progress that benefits everybody. A lot of this is summarized on this clean page that's really designed just to this exact topic. And it's a pretty long page and it's got lots of advice. It's got little sample dialogues. It's got some resources. So there's lots of stuff on here that's very similar to what I'm saying here that really can help walk you through some of this classroom dynamic. You can find that page either through the link or if you go to the clean homepage through the educator's tools. So back to this. So I'm going to go through these. So you want people to feel heard. The classroom is a safe space. People, it's the whole there are no dumb questions thing, and understanding that these students largely are bringing this. They've heard these pieces of pushback. They are not probably originating within them. The things they've been told, probably by people they trust and love. And so be careful with lighting those statements on fire. So you want to just thank people for bringing their points of view to the classroom and setting the tone for everyone that is welcome there. A good place to move from there is to think about how do we build this new information, that we do not necessarily want to make it a one-way street, but to emphasize instead the idea of exploring the topic or collaborating using things like jigsaws where we kind of work on it together, investigations, case studies, things where we're really digging in. So instead of being told something, you actually are discovering something. And all the better if you can do it together. And so when we think of like sort of old world dissemination of information, like I'm so glad I'm able to call this old world. You have this like, well, I have the authority, I have the degree or the job or whatever. And that's part of the cultural pushback to climate change and all science right now, right? It's people like don't want to be told, don't tell me, you supposedly smart people. So I would set that aside in favor of something much more engaging and collaborative. And so now you're going to have like, I don't know, I can't tell you the answer. You've got the data set, you tell me. So flipping that script instead of it sort of coming from on high, making it about discovery. And of course, that's building a whole different set of scientific skills as well. So we have activities that do exactly this. This one is really cool because it does actually go through the process of science. And they even talk about the scientific consensus using the idea of, is eating dark chocolate going to help you lose weight? Because you want to be like, yes. And so it really and that's also very wise because it steps outside of climate change and it takes the same concept, but in a different topic. But things like this that really help students dig through the information on their own, or not totally on their own, but, so they can see the raw data and work on it from there rather than being lectured at about it. It's a good approach. Just another example, totally different pedagogies. This one uses actually a tag type game, uses analogies with a layer cake, and then there's some quantitative stuff with graphing to have students sort of look at what's the human factor here in climate change. This is a really cool case study. I wrote a story about this remarkable educator because she graduated all the way through her undergraduate in geology without being taught about climate change. And in part that was due to the age of her faculty members. Really, really interesting story. So here she goes in her first time teaching the topic, and she starts getting pushback. And this is like everyone's worst case scenario because she herself is not sure. And this is maybe something where we'd all that's what we have nightmares about, right? She did a really brave thing. She said, I don't know, let's find out together. That's so impressive. And so she realized she had to learn more, but they all went through it together. And in the end, it really built a really strong outcome because the students felt really heard and they felt to be part of the process, and that really did help sway them. And it really shook her up, but also motivated her. And so now she's like a leader in New York State science education, and she runs these climate symposiums for students, and it really shot her straight up as a leader in the field. So it was really amazing lesson. Okay, so next thing is to really focus on solutions. I feel like when you talk about climate change, you want to talk about the science to the point where you can see someone starting to get really sad. And then you're like, okay, that's sunk in. And hopefully you have the ability to design your curriculum to really not beat people over the head too much. But as soon as you can, move on to solutions. There's a lot of amazing education value in solutions because they are super relevant and super interesting. And they fit for all kinds of classes because there's a science, but there's also the economics and the technology and the engineering and the communications and marketing and public health. There's so many aspects to this. And so this is a great place to focus. And yeah, the PowerPoint you make for this year will already be out of date next year. It's kind of a pain, but it's really cool. Again, there's some Pew data showing how much people are really on board with this. And it's not just renewables versus oil and gas, but all types of solutions, whether it's energy efficiency or cars or heat pumps. There's so many things. And yeah, it gets people pretty excited, and it's not very controversial. This has always fascinated me. So we're back to maps. The orange colors are a lot of agreement. These are the people who say we should regulate carbon dioxide as a pollution or as a pollutant. And these are the people that say CO2 is basically causing climate change, which is to say it's far fewer people. So people are willing to solve a problem that they don't actually think exists. It's mind-blowing, but it's incredibly useful for us. So yeah, so most people are like, yep, let's solve it. Great, okay. We can kind of divert or maybe not dwell so much on the parts where we disagree and really emphasizes the parts where we do agree. That said, I understand that a curriculum is what it is, and you can't just skip over climate science. Depends on your situation. Clean has some cool stuff. These renewable energy living labs it's a series. It's engineering based. They're very interesting and very fun. They run off this National Renewable Energy Laboratories data-based map. There are many layers you can click. You can zoom way in, and it quantifies for you the solar and or the wind availability in that region or in that location. And so there's a bunch of different activities built around this. And it's really cool because they lock in on the locations. You could take the location used in the lab and make it your location. They're very quantitative. They're very much on the engineering side, which is pretty cool. And then of course, they're totally NGSS ready. So these are really fun. And I think students can get into the curiosity and the problem solving and exploring the map and be much less focused on the fact that they don't like wind turbines. They think they're ugly or whatever. So it's really truly inquiry driven exercise. Why do I keep doing that? Sorry. Yeah, okay. I follow the Twitter feed of my senator, unfortunately, and he makes everything a culture war. Everything, as often as possible, it's about woke people doing this and wah. It's very unappealing. But why he does that is he's trying to divide people, and that people who care about climate change are a different kind of person, and that is not you. And that's wrong. The cool thing about where we're at with climate change right now is everybody is doing something. So if you can find ways to show your students that it's not just tofu eating, vegan liberals and wherever, like San Francisco, whatever, like pick your worst stereotype. That is not who cares about climate change. Like all kinds of people are in on this, and even people like you. And that's a huge shift, because it's not an us and them or a woke versus whoever. It's like, no, your people, my people, us, our neighbors, our cities. The picture in the middle here about this Kentucky battery plant, I think is just brilliant. Like, I don't know why Ford did that, but I'm personally really glad they put that right in the Southeast, right where there's a lot of disengagement. But what a great way to get buy-in is to give you jobs and bring money there and get these people trained and relevant. And now they are going to be amazing advocates for clean energy. So you might have to look around to find your crowd, but you know your students and you know your region. So the more you can find areas and examples of what's happening near you, the better. That can really break apart that stereotype of there are people who care about climate change and those are not me, because that's just thankfully become totally incorrect. And lastly, we are all in this together. You can also get pushback from this is terrible, everybody sucks, we're never going to fix it. It's the other side of the coin. But this kind of inclusivity, I think, brings in everybody, and that this is a collective problem. There are collective solutions. Not any one person caused it. Not any one person can solve it. But there's a lot of attraction, sort of social and cognitive and emotional attraction to being on a winning team. So when you point out winning examples, again, framed in the way that they include your audience, it's hard not to start to feel a little bit good about it. And so when you show those successes, then it really helps. It helps bring people on board, and it helps cheer up those who feel understandably bummed about it. Let's see. The one example, yeah, so these examples here are actually from the solar schools, which I think is like the perfect example, because in some of these cases you get a couple of students really motivated and they really truly move the needle. And it's a brilliant example. So this group, Generation 180, has maps of where the schools are and things like that. So a nice existing program you can build off of. Okay, so if you want to, those are just examples, and I'm winding down here. But so the Clean Collection has lots of stuff. You can sort it for the humans can take action, or you can use the search box. We also have pages that are designed around this ones that humans can take action to reduce climate change and its impacts. Also energy, how energy decisions get made. So these pages are like little teacher guides that can guide you through that. And so you can learn a little bit more about how to bring that into the classroom and more examples. The last thing I'll say is that people do change their minds. It's rare, but it's fascinating. And so this is one of the early pieces I wrote for Yale Climate Connections. And I found this big Reddit thread full of people. And the question was on Reddit was like, hey, climate deniers, what changed your mind? And I was like, ooh, please tell me everything. Some things I'll excerpt from there. The reason people are climate skeptical or whatever, it starts with how they grow up. It starts with their family members and maybe their worldview of their family members. And so that's how it's going to be for your students. They're bringing this in from their family. When you ask people what changed their mind, the number one reason, yes, is science. And so it does, when people, grow up and sort of leave their family, then other factors can help inform them. Some of the commenters talked about the circumstances in which they change their mind, and they're not all, but the most common one was science class in high school or college, which is like really exciting. And they have the article gives you some quotes. It was, labs and videos and teachers who were very patient. So it can be done. It has been done. The other thing I've learned, and I've done some deep dive interviews with people who've really made big, giant 180s, and it's long, it's slow. And here's where we run into a little bit of a brick wall, is that we were like, how can it take long? I just told you I just told you all the science. I just showed you the data. How can you still not have changed your mind? And so another thing that we need to do is remember that changing your mind, the bigger the issue, the harder it is. They're going to have to go against their own cultural norms. It's slow. People need support in doing it. These case studies are really interesting because these people were very generous to sort of really share the emotional journey. I've interviewed a bunch more people too, and it is an emotional journey. It's very hard. So it's long. You are part of it. You might not turn it around quickly, but that's okay. You're still part of it. And so I think it's important to know that the journey to becoming more informed, changing your mind is long and slow, but the fact that everyone here is a huge part of that process. And when you view it like that, like I am, a seed in a garden, it feels a lot more encouraging rather than getting really discouraged about it didn't happen enough or quickly enough or whatever. So I think this attitude helps us be more realistic also. And that is it. So that's all I have to say. So I'm going to turn my video back on. And if you have questions or dilemmas or anything like that, we would love to hear them. If not, you're excused. Thank you. And you've got some links and things like that to go off of. But yes, if you have questions, please hang around and we'd like to hear what you've got.
We didn't have a lot of questions in the chat. We had, sorry, I'm just pulling it up. One person said, I feel like alarmed isn't a strong enough word for how I feel. And everyone was +1ing in the chat, which was
right.
The
whole like nauseous category.
Yeah, just pit of my stomach is the feeling. Okay, so
nice.
Yeah, Lee said interesting that although Alaska is a red state, overall believe in climate change is being caused by humans. Yeah, that is interesting.
Which is great. And I think in part because you have like Arctic amplification, like the effect is so profound. But it's interesting because Alaska is also just a hugely fossil fuel producing state. But I think looking to states like Alaska is a great place to find, if you want those sort of culturally relevant examples. Alaska would be a good one because they have a tight relationship with nature, yet they're extracting and living off of the resource that's causing the problem. I bet there's a ton to be learned in places like that. And it doesn't necessarily just go red and blue on people's belief. It depends on what else is going on. So that's a great point.
And then Alicia's asking, how do you support students who want to engage in climate issues but don't have support at home? It's a very good question.
Super good question. There is on that page, the clean page that says managing the climate discourse in your classroom, there is a resource that's called something like Having the Talk. And it's about how to talk to family members. It addresses this spot on. However, that might be a big ask because basically it's saying go to your family member and have a conversation. And so maybe that's too, you have to back off and scaffold that a little bit. But really you'd end up wanting to ask a lot of questions. What's going on at home? And just the same way that we frame our messaging, you could coach your student through that same process. Does people in your household want to save some money? Probably, almost certainly, yes. And so you can come at it again from the solutions angle. In general, that's where the push is going to be coming from the families. And so finding ways to help students make that arc, I think, is really important. It's really scary for them because now they're trapped between the people they trust as their teachers and role models and people they trust as their family, and they're really stuck. And so to appreciate and really support them it's a big job. And that's actually a huge service that we can lend. But yeah, start out with that resource. I really like that. A lot of my insight came from that. It emphasizes a lot of listening as well, because letting other people talk, man, that actually like makes the world go round, because everyone likes to be heard. And so that student could bring that same tactic to their family.
Yeah, and I'm just putting the managing
question.
discourse
Yeah.
link in the chat again. Oh yeah, great question.
That is a great question. I have not heard about that. It could be terrifying for the teacher but I think that'd be really interesting. That's a great question, Kathy. Thank you. And I'm going to ask around. I think Don Haas might be an interesting person to ask, because he does a lot of this work as well. Yeah, I've not heard of that happening. So if someone does that, let us know. Otherwise, I'll ask around. And Kathy, if you have heard of that happening, let us know also, because you need a pretty robust teacher you'd need someone, maybe a couple. Yes. Oh, now the chat's moving faster than I can catch up. My mouse.
In conversations in churches, which
for sure,
when you approach it, absolutely.
Yeah, and I know you've all heard of Catherine Naho and the groundbreaking work she does there. And one of those case studies, believe it or not, I question repeatedly to try to get at where did this seed of change start, this mindset. And he finally says it came from church. Not what I expected to hear, but really encouraging that it started as church, and the pastor was forward thinking and wanting to sort of people to be, a little softer on the world. Couldn't believe it, but really encouraging.
Nice.
Okay.
Yeah, next question about data. So which phrases might resonate with different groups?
Yes, there was just a paper out on that. And I don't remember exactly. Yeah, I'll have to put that as homework. Alicia, if you put your contact info in the chat, I can send you that paper, because someone did test that, particularly the phrasing with climate crisis. So yeah, if you want me to send you the paper, put your email in the chat and I'll find it. Right.
Oh, sorry. I think
oh, she's got it. Okay.
Some of the questions are going to hosts and panelists and not to everyone. So
thank you.
Sorry, that's our bad. Is there any data about which phrases, examples, climate change, climate disruption, or global warming best resonate with different groups? And I know that there's along with the Yale Climate Communications Group, they work with the George Mason Center for Climate Change Communication.
Yeah.
A lot of similar opinion surveying and that type of thing. They'd be another really cool group to check out, because I know actually I went to grad school there and they exclusively called it global warming and not climate change, because of one of the studies that they had done, which I always thought was interesting. So
yes.
They'd be another cool group to check out. Probably data on that.
Yeah. But Alicia, now I got your email address and I'll send you that paper.
Justina has a question. I had the environmental analyst from our local coal power plant speak to my students about emissions and the effects on the environment. It was very helpful. So not a question, but that's an interesting tactic.
Right. Utilities are really interesting. Don't advocate for taking them literally because they are corporations, but there's a lot that they're, almost every company now has some eye on sustainability and energy and emissions and things like that. And so I like that. People in the coal community, they know what's going on, and it's cool to hear it directly from them. Vet them first. I live in Montana, one of these states that's clean to coal, and unfortunately, you have to really know what you're doing so you know what you can believe or not. But it also makes great opportunities for states like ours, because we have a lot that we can improve on. And Wyoming is in the same boat. It's really interesting to watch these states try to decide whether they're going to go down with the ship or switch energy sources. So yeah, that's a great idea.
Any other thoughts
Nice.
from
Okay.
folks?
I think we caught up. That's good. We're oh, now we got it.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Kathy has a statement for everyone. Diana said older scientists stated and used the term global warming instead of climate change. I was told that when writing an NSF postdoctoral grant. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's both those comments are related to each other, both from Diana as well as Kathy, and that there is that misconception that we the scientific community changed the terminology to what, I don't know, scare people or whatever. But then there's that Frank Luntz memo that basically actually says that, well, climate change as a political sort of cultural term actually originated from Republicans because it sounded less scary than global warming. Then again, the science has been using either, but that largely uses climate change because it captures more. Yeah, and when you hear especially if someone's going to, when you hear, we've heard a lot of these misconceptions before, and so I always try to, even though I've answered it like so many times or heard it, I try to just like deflect it, like that one really doesn't matter. And so if someone comes all hot under the collar about that, I try to see is there a road around this? Do we really need to get into the wording? The wording does matter, but not as much as maybe other things. But yeah, and because now we have climate crisis as supplanting everything, and you can have that same argument all over again. So definitely worth thinking about. Not worth maybe it's not like the most important thing, but still important. Coming back up. And I definitely appreciate Kathy's point about global versus local. For sure that the more we want to talk about, I think the local things are the relevant things and the interesting things. The change that's happened in Montana is the unbelievable smoke. And, no one used to, climate change was just not, we refuse to talk about it. And now it is literally in your face. And it's much easier to make that point at any kind of community meeting, or anytime you're talking to the utility or our political leaders. It's a huge, huge, huge topic now. And it's great because now we're not talking about polar bears anymore. We're talking about the fact that we can't go outside in the summer. So it's good.
Any other thoughts? I put it in the chat a while back, but there is a really handy document that Karin generously made us that has links for all of the, here it is again. I just put it in the chat. Links for all of the resources and articles and research she talked about today are in that document. I'll try to send it out after the webinar is over, so you have it again, but there it is. And yeah, any other closing thoughts from folks?
I'm just putting my email in the chat too. So if you've got other questions or you want to, whatever, a scenario or a question or an idea, the lines are always open. I really like learning about this topic. My latest bent is I talk to voters like crazy because you just learn so much by hearing what they have to say. And it's the most random audience. And so that's been a really fun way for me to learn more and more just about how people think and then to practice different methods. And so I extend that same philosophy to you. Bring me, tell me what you're doing and I'll be excited to share in that and learn from it. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, it looks like the chat has slowed down, but thank you,
Great.
Karin, always for your wisdom. And thanks everyone for joining. It's great having you here and talking about this stuff. And thank you for all you do.
Yes, thanks to everyone. It's fun. It does feel like, boy, the momentum has built, and it's becoming a very, very, very strong and huge team. So thanks for being part of it. And yeah, I look forward to the next iteration of whatever it is. Thank you, Gina.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your evening. Thanks.
Cool.